Harper Audio presents Sea Creatures by Susanna Daniel, performed by Karen White. Part 1. Chapter 1. It was my husband Graham's idea to buy the houseboat. The notion took shape on the first leg of our move from Illinois to Miami, between pulling away from the cottage in Round Lake and stopping at the county fair outside of Peoria, where we urged our 3-year-old Frankie into a gargantuan bouncy castle. For a few minutes, Frankie seemed to take some pleasure in jumping haphazardly among strangers, until he remembered that he didn't like strangers and staggered lock-kneed toward the exit. I mentioned this interlude in the long drive for one reason. A few minutes after we walked away from the enormous cartoonish castle, a gust of wind upended it, bouncing children and all. Ambulances arrived quickly. As we stood among the anxious crowd, I thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that to be a parent is terrifying. Graham once told me how the Stoics practiced imagining their own worst fears had come to pass to make peace. But it seems to me that what worries us most, pedophiles, kidnappers, dog attacks, is least likely to happen, while what is most likely is some unimagined event. And how do we prepare for that? We debated the pros and cons of the houseboat through Tennessee and Georgia. An adventure, Graham said, and relatively inexpensive. Naive, I thought, considering neither of us knew much about boats. Making the most of the locale, he argued. Soggy and mildewed, I said. We'd intended to rent a house on Key Biscayne, near the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, where Graham would occupy a 2-year research fellowship. But once my husband latched onto an idea, it was difficult to shake him loose. And the truth was that I wondered if living on a houseboat might be every bit the adventure he hoped. Sometimes you have to remind yourself after adventure comes that there was a time when you went looking for it. We stopped for fuel outside of Gainesville, and Graham picked up a Boat Trader magazine, then made a few calls when we stopped again in St. Cloud. By the time we reached Miami, he'd found 3 candidates, all in the Pompano area. After we unloaded the trailer into the spare room of my father's wife's house, Graham got back on the road with my father at the wheel. Graham didn't drive, not since he was a teenager. I'd done all of the driving from Illinois while he fidgeted in the passenger seat, and Frankie slept open-mouthed in his car seat, a coloring book open across his thighs and a crayon in his fleshy fist, waking every so often to give the sign for milk and dig into a sleeve of crackers. We stopped every few hours at a rest area, and while I plotted our route and fetched cold drinks, Graham led Frankie in a vigorous game of freeze tag, and they returned to the car red-faced and panting. For much of the ride, I eyed our hulking trailer in the side view mirror, my gut lurching each time it swerved with the contours of the road. When I started off from a stop, the heavy pull of the trailer reminded me of the lifeguard tests I'd taken in junior high, when I'd swum the length of a pool wearing 2 pair of blue jeans and 3 sweaters. It was exactly the same feeling. I knew where I was going, and I was damned if I wouldn't break away from something powerful to get there. To the extent that Graham would have admitted that his aversion to driving was a phobia, it was incongruent with his bold and blustery personality, his assertiveness, even his maturity. When we'd gotten serious, I'd thought I might ingratiate him to the act of driving with subtle, loving encouragement. He'd been in the back seat, 16 years old, when his mother's car had jumped the median on the way home from a birthday party. It was February, the roads were icy. His sister Lauren, 14 at the time and in the passenger seat, was thrown clear and never regained consciousness. Graham insisted that the event had been so sterilized by retelling and scrubbed by time that the 2 things, witnessing his sister's death and not driving, were unrelated. This was a testament not to Graham's lack of self-awareness, I believe, but to the confused nature of each of our personal histories, the mess of contradicting passions and aversions developed over a lifetime.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?